so that the notes are big.
Yeah. Let me.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what they see. Well, folks, I have to say that I am in awe. We never start on time around here. And look at you, give yourselves a hand. Our hope was to start at quarter till, and here we are. Our hope is also to go until 11:30, but we'll hang around for a little bit afterwards to answer questions if you have them. We do have a space towards the end for questions, and I'm going to ask you to hold your questions, write them, down on your sheet or something until then, until question time. If you absolutely have to ask something right away, that's okay too. And Deb over here is managing our online folks. And so if you're online and you have a question, there's a number at the bottom of your screen to text it to. Deb will grab it and ask it for you. Another thank you to our media ministry team who have all kinds of things set up, microphones and electronics, and we really appreciate your willingness to make this available widely. So, today we're going to talk about becoming a public church. There is a team from Immanuel that has spent 2 years working with the Augsburg University Riverside Innovation Hub, along with 11 other congregations. There are 12 in total. We've been working toward this concept of public church, or working with our neighbors for the community. And as we begin, I'd like to think a little bit about why. Why are we going through all this? Why are we making some changes in the way we look at things and do things? And to do that, I bring you some information out of Luther Seminary. Michael Binder and Andy Root have done some work on this, and so here we go. We all know that the world has changed, right? It's changed a lot, and the way people approach the world has changed. There's been a shift in the way people make meaning, or see meaning in the world. Up until about 1960 is what's being called now the age of association. It's when people joined things. Churches were huge, and they talked about their membership, become a member of the church. People were part of the Rotary. They were part of the Scouts. They joined bowling leagues. They knew themselves as being a part of something. They joined groups to be a good citizen and to help others. Beginning in about 1960, and you all know what was going on in the world in the 60s, there was a lot of things changing, a lot going on. We moved into what's being called the age of authenticity. People started distrusting institutions. You can't trust the banks. You can't trust the big corporations. You can't trust the government. You can't trust the church. And people looked less at what they were associated with and way more at their uniqueness. How am I unique in the world? How am I gifted? What is my purpose in the world? And so people started creating their own forms of identity and purpose. Let me give you an example. So in the age of association, Elizabeth is known as the wife of James, the mother of Jake and Chris. She's known as a member of Immanuel Lutheran Church and volunteers with her circle to do things in the world. She works at the library. She volunteers for the Red Cross. She is known by her associations, how she fits in society. In the age of authenticity, Elizabeth is known for what makes her stand out, what makes her unique. She's someone who loves to travel. She's a rabid Vikings fan. She loves to check out breweries with her friends. She helps out with youth at her church, and they love the way she dyes her hair to match the liturgical seasons. It's how she stands out, how she's unique. We see a lot of that in funerals these days. People want to celebrate the life of the person. Everybody wear purple because they were a Vikings fans. We're going to blow bubbles because they love Lawrence Welk. We look at the uniqueness, not how they were part of things. And there's good and bad in each of these ages. The age of association could be very exclusive. People had to conform to certain things or they were not allowed to be part of the group. Age of authenticity is very welcoming, but it's also very individualistic. There's good and bad in both of these. The issue for us is we are here. We are here in between the two ages, in the midst, as people are trying to figure things out. So, one of the ways we see this is the questions people ask at church. Here are some of the questions for the two ages. Age of association. People say, why aren't people joining our church? Why don't we have more members? They ask, why can't we get people to be on committees? They ask, where are the young people? And my very favorite, you want me to pray? Out loud? That's something the pastor does as the leader of this group. In the age of authenticity, people are asking, and not necessarily in the church, people are asking, where can I find answers to life's big questions? How do I connect faith to what's going on in my life? How can I find an authentic spiritual community? And people are looking in a lot of places, as I said, not just churches, they're looking everywhere to find this connection with God. How can I find practices that mean something to me? I hear these questions a lot, more so even than why aren't people joining our church? So what does this mean for the church? For the church, it means that we need to be aware that people are looking in a lot of places for transcendence. They're looking for God both in the church and outside of the church. And how can we help them connect with God in many ways? Because they're looking for transcendence in many places, we're finding that judgment, things like judgment and purity and righteousness, which were always the purview of the church, are no longer. People are judging whether you are caring for the environment. You're wasting water, you're not a good person. Or through diet. Are you clean eating? Are you organic? That's a way of that we judge each other. Judging each other by sexual orientation, judging people by their political affiliations. And people are seeing those things in transcendent ways, not just as, well, that's what the political party they follow. So there's this widespread need for transcendence. There's also a lot of despair out there, a lot of hopelessness. We know there is injustice. We know there's a lot of isolation. And as we're aware of that, then we can start looking for ways the church can speak to those things. Some of the ways we can speak is by helping people make spiritual sense of their longings and losses, of their everyday. Where is God in this thing I'm going through? That is a goal for the church. And the other one is the one that we're addressing with Public Church. And that is, how do we help people both inside and outside the church deepen their connections with God, with each other, and with the neighborhood? How do we find God? How do we find what God's up to? And help people connect with that. So here's what we did.
So a team of 5 of us have worked in the spring of 2021, 2 years ago. We applied to Augsburg to participate in their public church program. So that's where Cindy said 11 other churches, not all Lutheran. We've been working together for 2 years. We started in that summer. And we've been attending learning events over at Augsburg in the large group and quarterly, and cohort meetings of 4 churches together in between, learning about how to become public church. We learned what's on your handout, in the picture handout, until last fall. And then in the winter, we had an an offsite where we talked about how to implement and sustain change in a congregation. And in June, we will celebrate completion and moving ahead with what we've learned. Do they also have that in the handout?
On the back of this picture, there is reading from Ezekiel.
So you can read the text yourself, but we've been studying Ezekiel as well as the council has been, which tells the story of a trickle of water that emerges from the altar of the temple. The water is coming from God. It flows out of the temple, down the steps, and into the land. And the further it gets from the temple, the deeper the water gets. It nourishes the whole land, and alongside of it, the tree of life grows. This story is repeated in Revelation 22 about the new world God will create. So what we're learning from this text is the temple cannot contain God's creative force. The temple becomes a source of blessing for the entire land, rather than just a fixture intended to serve its own purpose. Becoming public church can help Immanuel be a source of blessing for our neighborhood and our community. So this is the process Augsburg has been teaching us. The main point is to empower each person, each of us in the congregation, to be curious about our neighborhood, to learn, and to take action based on what we're learning and hearing and partnering with. It's about trying to do it and learning as we go. We want to be willing to try new things, and you might find that it's not as hard as you thought it would be. So I'm going to be talking further about each of these, but as you look at this process, it kind of starts at the top left with accompaniment, and then works its way around to the right, kind of 4 logical steps in order. But then it circles back around, and we're always going to be doing these steps. So the first one is accompaniment, where we listen to our neighbors. We meet with them, listen to them, and build relationships. We're curious about others' stories, what they are experiencing, what's important to them, what they are seeing, hearing, and feeling. We're not out there to be fixing anything. We're not inviting them to come to Immanuel. We're just listening. Our team, and I remember I forgot to introduce our team. So our team was Lauren Danielson, Scott Norquist, Pastor Cindy, Kelsey Maniaci, who's sitting right there. The 2 guys were not able to be with us today, and myself. So we started out by kind of organizing our listening, thinking we should talk to this organization, we should talk to that person. But then it came down to just being curious. And in the places that we are naturally being in the community, that's where we've been doing our listening. Learning from the people that we're with, the people that we know. Ask questions. Listen, listen, listen. So Scott listened to his neighbors. Kelsey listened to parents at school, where she is a school nurse. I listened at a garden club plant sale. Cindy listened at community meetings. Lauren listened at Keystone and the Department of Indian Work, where he volunteers. The other thing, it was actually the first activity we did as a team, and something that you can do is take a walk. Take a walk through the neighborhood. Barb?
How did that get started, the conversation? Like Kelsey at school, did you ask a question, or it just came about naturally?
So Barb, actually, we'd like to come back to that during our questions at the end, just because we have a lot of material to go through. So hold that thought. And then, so as you walk, notice areas of good news and bad news. Are there unwelcoming spaces or yards that are trashed? Are there new businesses moving into the neighborhood? Are there kids playing outside? Oops. I don't know how to scroll down. There. So if you hear when you're out listening and notice something that sticks with you, bring it to church. You can bring it to staff or council, our RIH team, or other groups that you are with, like circle or council or choir, I mean. Are other people noticing the same thing? You know, that's where, you know, if we're hearing kind of from multiple sources the same kind of thing, that is something that we might really want to take a deeper look at. But this is not about going out and finding a project to do in the neighborhood. It's about building relationships, discovering our neighbors' gifts. What do they have to offer? How can we partner with them? And knowing what people are concerned about or joyous about. So after listening, then we move into a step called interpretation. We're looking through our lens of faith, reflecting on Bible stories that are most meaningful to us. We're reflecting on our congregational values, and then taking the time to relate both of these to what we've heard in the neighborhood. We think about what we've heard through a lens of faith, but you have to know the faith. What do we believe? What do we teach? What are our core beliefs?
So what are our core beliefs? We were going to have a whiteboard here, but it has disappeared. So there you go.
Grace.
Grace.
Life with Jesus.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Life with Jesus.
The life of Jesus, right.
Love.
Love.
Friendship. Friendship.
Okay, friendship.
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness.
Serving others.
Serving.
Gratitude.
Gratitude.
Welcoming.
Welcoming. You guys have got this down. I mean, there are things we talk about all the time around here. We talk about abundance. We talk about welcome. We talk about caring for others. This is the lens that we start looking at the things we've listened to through. We don't just say, oh, there's this, and we can fix that and fix that. We think, what does God have to say about these things? Mm-hmm.
So then, how might we relate all of these things to our neighbors? Continue to think about our beliefs and scriptures that mean a lot to us. For example, the council is also spending a lot of time with this text from Ezekiel 47 this month. One of the circles is using this book called Manna and Mercy, which is like a current language summary of the entire Bible with illustrations. Our team used this with our AH as well, and we have extra copies if any of you would like to check this out, take a look at it. So after interpretation, then we move into discernment, listening to God, using our faith practices that open us to the Spirit's work and what God is asking us to do. Be willing to practice individually as well as in group settings like committees and project teams. So another of your handout is the Liturgy of Discernment. And this is a process for use in meetings to help us pull this kind of stuff together. It helps us bring ourselves into the meeting and our experiences in the community come into the meeting. It helps us to listen to God and open our hearts and minds to the Holy Spirit to be with us in the meeting and influencing what we do. And then we move into the business of the meeting. And because we've prepared ourselves in such a good way, then the business of the meeting works very well and smoothly. And always continue to ask the question yourself, what might God be up to? And listen to how God might respond. This brings God into the conversation. We ask, What is God calling us to do? Let's ask God about that. And then the fourth step is proclamation. So now we're prepared to move into doing something, into bringing good news, using what we've discovered, organize and collaborate with our neighbors. This might be something new, or it might be joining what is already happening in the neighborhood. It could be large things or small things, one time or ongoing, partnerships. Sometimes it won't work, sometimes it will. And Mission Possible is another tool that we got from RIH that Cindy is holding up. It actually just has about 8 things to think about when you're planning to do something. So it's very helpful in thinking about all the things that should be considered. So it helps you make a plan of action. So now we've looked a little bit at each of the 4 steps, but this is not a one-time project. It's a journey. And as we follow this around, after we proclaim, then we can repeat these steps, and we can make adjustments, and we can develop new understanding and come into new relationships. And so what we learn by trying something, doing, then we take that back out we're back out in the community. We're listening, we're learning, we're changing. And I think once we get going on this, we will be operating in all 4 of these at the same time, because and we want all of us to be thinking in this way and have our ears open so that we can always be listening. What? Sure.
We didn't decide ahead of time what we were each going to do. This is an example that came out of us learning how to do this process. So in the accompaniment part of it, one of the things we've heard a lot of things, right? But one of the things we heard is that parents get really frustrated with the number of times school's closed. I'm seeing a parent back there smiling about that. It's the teacher conference days, there are federal holidays, there are snow days. There's just a number of random times during the year that school is closed, and it's hard for parents, especially those who struggle with childcare to begin with. And we also know that St. Paul Public School children need some extra help after the pandemic, that folks have gotten behind. We also know that there's a wide difference in learning outcomes for students of color and white students. So all of this was part of our listening as we listened in the community. So then we started thinking, well, how does that relate to us being Lutheran Christians? And a couple of the thoughts we had were, we are one body with many gifts. We can bring a lot of different gifts to this, like on Pentecost, the Spirit comes. Another Bible story we put against this was Jesus teaches us to care for real people with humility, and that's from the story of Jesus washing feet. We also know that God is abundant. God provides. There will be enough. God will give us what we need. And so with those things in mind, we started thinking and listening to God, and recognized that over time, from long before I came, Immanuel has been focused on children. In many ways, in worship, in music, a lot of ways we have just focused on children. And we remembered that there were several opportunities in the past that led us to working with schools. We've had people that did work at not Ramsey anymore, it's 2 Rivers, right? 2, 3? Hidden River. Okay, I live near what used to be Sibley, and it's 2 Rivers, and this one's Hidden River, and I always confuse them. So we've had some work with them. We have a number of parents who have kids in the schools. So that came to us. And then we also, as we meditated on this, realized we got McAllister across the street. And maybe they would be able to partner with us. So we've begun to work toward implementing this fall Student Spot to support parents and students both in this neighborhood and in other neighborhoods that have fewer resources, to support them on weekdays when there's no school or remote learning. we're going to work with other partners in the community because there's so many gifts out there. We've talked with Pilgrim, and they're excited about sending us some volunteers to help with that. And then Emily and I talked to the student engagement people at McAllister, who are in charge of finding volunteer places for their students. And they went nuts. They were so excited about this idea. They said, look, a volunteer thing that's not asking like for a weekly commitment, that is across the street. They don't even have to take a bus to get there. And they said, and it's working with kids. So our kids in the education department can get some experience. And then they started dreaming even bigger, and they said, wow, we have student athletes that want to volunteer. They could take the kids over to the gym and shoot baskets with them. Or we have empty theaters during the day that kids could go over and put a play together. And they were just going on and on and on. And then Emily was kind of feeling like, okay, I'm just going to shoot for the moon. She said, I've got a little bit of money. I would like to have a couple of interns that could help us plan this. And they said, well, you know, we plan student internships too. We could probably pay for that. So, I mean, we just walked out of this meeting going, oh my gosh, look at what can happen if you reach out to the community for a community need. And so within this process of accompaniment, listening, and thinking about what our faith says about that, and listening to where God might lead us, we're kind of excited about what could happen. Now, who knows? We might fall flat on our face. But at this point, it's looking very hopeful that we have something going out of this. This is not a one-project program. This is us all continuing to listen and thinking, well, I know God says this, and let me pray about it, and I've got an idea Immanuel could do. We need lots of folks, lots of teams, and lots of individuals kind of jumping in and trying this process, because it can work. All right, Sue, I'm handing it back to you.
Oh, I do the arrow. So, a public church changes in organic and iterative ways. It doesn't happen overnight. This will happen slowly as we have aha moments or catch ourselves falling back into old ways. A public church is curious and intentional, asking, what is God up to, and how can we get involved? This is the most important question we can ask. A public church wants to build relationships, not recruit members. We're not doing this because we want new members. We want to bring the good news into our neighborhood. Jesus never said, go out and get members. Okay. Oh, okay. A public church considers neighbors in activities. We can invite neighbors, or can we invite neighbors to work with us? You know, kind of after the fact, after Undie Sunday, we said, we should have invited neighbors to contribute undies. We should have invited them to come and help us package on that Sunday. But we're learning. A public church engages with the neighborhood in small and large ways. Are there little things we can do? For example, Fairmont United Methodist Church nearby noticed kids playing in their side yard, and so they put some chairs out there, inexpensive chairs, and the kids used them. And as a matter of fact, other people in the community got a cup of coffee and sat in their chairs. Little things like that. A public church reflects our own neighborhood. Can we avoid saying, it worked over there, we should do it, we should try it? You know, like the Adirondack chair example. Instead, we should lean into our own listening and our own congregation and our own talents. Like there's a neighbor across the street who is interested in helping us improve our landscape with flowers outside.
She divided her own flowers and brought some and planted them in our space.
And a public church acknowledges neighbors' gifts, shifting from serving and helping neighbors, you know, just going out, and instead partnering with neighbors. Whoops, darn. Can we stop saying what we can do for you or what we can do for them. Instead, what can we do together? What is God up to? What can we join in our neighborhood? You may be familiar with this diagram. Our council came up with this about 5 years ago or so. It is our congregational vision and the ends that we wish to achieve. Our vision is to bring God's message of hope to our communities. And our ends are work for justice by addressing racism and bias, connect with our communities, be a resource for spiritual renewal and living lives of faith. We think that this public church approach, working with our neighbors, aligns exactly with where we said 5 years ago that we want to be going as a congregation. Now we've left time at the end for questions, and just before we start that, I have one more thing to announce in case you need to leave during questions. 2 weeks from today, on May 14th, Jeremy Myers is coming. Jeremy Myers has been working with us, the Immanuel RIH team, these 2 years. He's the executive director of the Christian Center for Vocation at Augsburg. He's the faculty lead for the Riverside Innovation Hub, and he's the director of the Theology and Public Leadership degree program at Augsburg. And so he'll be here to preach, and then he'll be here to talk with us in a session like this 2 weeks from today. So we hope that you can come back for that. Now, we would like to entertain questions.
Barb, you have a question?
I already asked.
Okay. So can you remind me?
Kelsey, how did you get your compensation? As a nurse, you probably had a child that was sick.
Repeat the question.
So you're asking,
How did you get your conversation started?
so Barb is asking Kelsey, who is a school nurse, how did she get her conversation started in the school?
So I work for early childhood screening, so I'm actually at schools and
Why don't you come up?
I always think I'm nurse, I forgot.
so I work at schools and daycares and other community events across St. Paul, and it wasn't like anything very intentional at first, but then you just start thinking differently about the conversations and listening a little bit differently, and so you just start picking up on themes from conversations about just parents, just their lives and things like that, and sometimes their struggles or sometimes their gifts that they have, and yeah, I guess we would just pick up themes across and then we'd bring it back to the group. It wasn't anything major, it was just a regular conversation.
You can do it. So Kelsey also said a place that she could talk in the community or listen, that is, and ask questions was when she brought her kids to the playground.
I mean, you can listen anywhere you want. So yeah, it was just like about being shifting my mindset to being very intentional about listening versus just just talking. But then making the connection of could my church be involved in some of these themes that we're listening or we're hearing across the community? Is not just leaving it there at the park, is thinking about can we be a part of this and somehow, and providing some sort of connection for the community. Yeah.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Thanks, Kelsey.
Next question, Dick.
I was talking to Harvey Jaeger about the excess money we have in the capital fund, and he has in his brain working out having a outside gathering place on our boulevard, and we're talking about in the church and outside the church. We'd like to leave it outside the church rather than inside the church, but just the fact that it's more safety and not being involved, they can come and go as they like. But Harvey is designing some plans, and it's kind of like in not knowing about the public church, how that would incorporate the neighborhood together. But how do you separate the different religions, like the Jewish
Okay, you're asking us two questions. So the first question had to do with the fact that Harvey's looking at doing some renovations outside, and how does public church fit into that? And one thing, Harvey, we haven't come talk to you yet, but our suggestion is we don't just ask people in the church how they want to use the space. We ask the neighbors how they want to use the space, and put that together in our thinking of how we, because it's God's creation, right? We're doing interpretation. It's God's creation, and we are just stewards of it. So how can we steward it in a way that will help both the neighborhood and the people in the church? So that's one question. You two okay with that? Okay. And then the second question you ask is, if we go out doing this public church stuff, how do we do that in the face of so many different beliefs out there? And again, our point is not to convert anybody. We're not going out to make members or bring people into our church. We're working with our neighbors for the common good. So we will interpret it as God's creation, or we will interpret it as God's abundance or God's leading. They might not, but we can still do the same work together for the common good, for the neighborhood. Does that make sense? Okay. Lynette. I'll
Well,
scoot
I've
over here.
been doing caucuses and board conventions, which is hanging out with your neighbors and hearing a lot about the need for youth programming. And I would like to suggest that we consider maybe figuring out how we can loop some troubled youth into this outside. I mean, these two guys are very talented. Most of those youth don't have fathers. You know, they would love to hang out or learn something from Harvey and.
Oh, that's a great idea. So Lynette said she's been going to caucuses, listening widely to neighbors, and hearing a lot about youth, especially troubled youth. And maybe as we start doing projects, we keep in the back of our minds, how can we loop some young people who are struggling or don't have a lot of resources? How can we loop them into the work we're doing? Because they're our neighbors, and they have gifts. They all have gifts that they can bring to this too. Thanks, Lynette.
Shalon.
Per usual, ideas are starting to.
Oh, no.
But it is in the form of a question. During the pandemic, I put a box out in my front yard and asked people's, like, what would you like of this? What could we do? And then they would leave their notes in the box or under my door. Could we have a box of some sort outside with this that would ask public ideas where people could feel free to just add it? And then similarly, a box inside the church for those of us where you can't get a staff member or committee member, where we could just jot down your ideas, because I think once people start praying, we all start praying about this, we need a place to put them outside instead of going, what was that again, or wearing Post-it notes to church.
I'm thinking about it.
Yes,
Can you repeat that?
So Shalon has a suggestion, actually, of using a box, one outside our church, one inside our church, to collect suggestions and ideas as people are listening and hearing, and great ideas are bubbling up. Deb.
I don't have an online question, but people could do that. My question is like coming to the end of the 3-year process here, a formal connection with RIH, right? So what is the next step? Who will champion this work to go forward? You can repeat that for those online.
So the question is, now that the IRH team is ending their 2 years, who is going to champion, and how is this work going to move forward?
The team met with the council last month and asked them to start taking more responsibility for making this happen. And I believe that that's the main agenda item for next month. The RIH team has agreed to continue as cheerleaders, consultants, and they also said that they would help with this first project kind of board of directors point of view to come up with things like best practices, just to kind of get us started. So these 5 are the experts who can help. The council wants to take some more responsibility, and Augsburg is not going to abandon us. They will continue to reach out to us and answer questions for us and help us figure out our way, because this thing is not going to happen overnight. I mean, people aren't, sorry, Brian. People are, there it is. People are not going to, start thinking in a different way immediately, right? They're not gonna, it's gonna take years of us experimenting with this before what happened to Kelsey happens to everybody. I just started listening differently. I just started seeing my neighbors differently. It's gonna take us a while. And RIH has said that they would help us in the midst of all of that. Does that answer your question, Deb?
Was there a question in the back?
Well, I just got an idea for Shalon's box.
Jane had an idea for Shalon's box.
But I think we could imitate their Mount Methodist and have a little free library in front. And use that box for, free food, free ideas, and books.
That's a great idea. Talk to Harvey. He went through the whole free library thing on our property a couple years ago. But there are things besides free libraries. There are free pantries. But we start with listening to find out, is that what our neighbors need? Is that what our neighbors need?
Well, so as you percolate this in your heads, the RH team, Pastor Cindy, we're all here to continue being interested in working with you. If your ministry teams would like to adopt the litany of discernment or other practices, we're here to help with that. And we're just waiting to see where God will be leading us.
Thank you. I am yet again amazed. We started on time. We're ending on time. Look at that. Thank you all, and hopefully you can join us in 2 weeks when Jeremy Myers comes. He'll be in worship and afterwards.